My brothers and sisters in Christ, today's gospel passage contains one of the commandments or teachings of Jesus that is still most controversial even to the present day, and that is the prohibition on divorce that arises from today's discourse. Now, if we just read the passage from the Gospel of Mark as we do, we might miss some subtle nuance that's very important to underline this teaching. We see, of course, that the Pharisees are squaring off with him, trying to test him again. But we'll notice that when they ask him about what the commandment is, and he asks them about what did Moses command you. Now, it's interesting because they quote rightfully from the book of Deuteronomy, the section of the law of Moses which dealt with certain prescriptions about how a bill of divorce was to be issued to a woman. Now, it's an interesting response that they make because something subtle that one who just read this passage may not know is Moses's reference in the book of Deuteronomy. It was not a positive law, but was actually in one sense a restriction. That is, and this is in light of our recent reading in the weekday readings from the beginnings of the book of Genesis, the very teaching that Jesus quotes from the beginning, God made them male and female, and the two become one flesh. So we saw how quickly, once sin entered the picture, how depravity just took over in every way. Well, by the time that the law of Moses comes along, divorce is already widespread, not through any teaching, not through any permission given by God. It's just happening. It's part of human society. And so Moses, at the time he gives the command, his reference is not commanding that people can get divorced, but he's actually putting a modification on the existing understanding of divorce, which is this bill of divorces be given to free a woman from any duties to the man who's dismissing his wife. Why is this important? Because otherwise, in this cultural setting, a woman would be in the worst of need or worst of situation if she were alone. And so if a woman is to find a new husband, she needs to be free from obligations to the first one. Moses is in fact actually protecting women with this decree here. He's not positively introducing a new permission of divorce. He's regulating what the people already understand to be okay and what they're already doing. So this gets very important because by the time that this discourse between the Pharisees and Jesus is happening, still, not only is there this hardness of heart that Jesus references about the understanding of divorce and adultery, but in fact, the Jewish practice and interpretation of the time was more regressive than other non-Jewish, certainly non-Christian points of view. For example, in the Roman Empire, Roman law gave women equal rights to divorce. The women were not property of their husbands. Women had equal rights under marriage and divorce in Roman law. In Jewish law, it was only the man who could initiate. And so the woman was at the mercy of her husband in many ways like property of the husband, which is why Moses sought to introduce this protection. But there's also in this a subtle recognition of women's rights before, as we see in the story of the woman caught in adultery. You'll notice in that story, no one makes a big deal about the man who was caught with her, because the only adultery charges were only targeted at women, never at men. And so what we have here is Jesus both bringing about an equality while introducing a stricter teaching. They both happen hand in hand. And so Jesus is condemning that God and later in the Old Testament, I want to say it's the book of Malachi, we hear the comment that God hates divorce. And so Jesus is upholding this, that divorce is not of God. This never came from God. From the beginning, before you sinned and humanity got depraved, God created man and woman to be joined as one flesh, as a permanent union. And so this is a radical teaching that shocks all the hearers and is still controversial to this day. People to this day still try to figure out exceptions or ways to wiggle out of this, but it's an extreme teaching that actually comes out of a place of revelation of God's love. That is the love with which he creates us, the love that he desires us free from sin and the new life of grace to have, and the equality of men and women that he intends, that women are not the property of their husbands. And so we see, if we flash forward to the present day and the great theology of the body of Pope St. John Paul II, for example, that God's prohibitions involved in marriage life and sexuality, all of these things, the world that grinds its teeth against it see it as restrictive or regressive, when in fact it's a teaching of profound freedom and love. And so, my brothers and sisters in Christ, may we look deeper into these teachings and the gift of love that God has given us in our hearts, the love which is manifested between man and wife in marriage, but the love ultimately with which he draws us to himself. May God bless you all.